Hey y'all, it's April from Bitches and Bourbon. I just wanted to come on and tell you guys a little bit about where I've been, where the bitches have been, and what we're doing next. So, I had a lot of big ideas about when I went to Ireland, about the things I was going to be able to do outside of school there. Suffice to say, none of that happened. Uh, Everything was it was like drinking out of a fire hydrant for 3 weeks, and it was one of the most amazing experiences. What did happen, however, is I don't even know how to explain it. I will tell you that I came out today. I just got home yesterday. So I came out today to kind of talk about a portrait of an artist as a young man because I had just finished it. And let me be upfront and say, I'm not sure I read this book well. However, in my opinion, this is just my first read in what I believe is going to be a very long journey. Therefore, I've decided to cut myself a little bit of slack in this regard. So before I delve into the literary commentary and try to parse out some of what I read, I'm going to go ahead and tell you the story of the journey. As most of you know, we've already added the books with bitches and bourbon component to what we're doing. Yesterday, or June 16th, depending on when you're encountering this, I returned home from what I can only describe as I don't know how I am ever going to be able to describe what happened trip to Ireland. Over the next however long it takes me to process all of the things I got to learn and do and see, and more importantly, all the people that I got to meet while I was there, I'll tell you about that trip. Today, however, I wanted to tell you about how much I fell in love with the idea, the history, the culture, and the people of Ireland, and how it's affecting my academic journey and intertwined with bitches and bourbon going forward. I realized while I was there that I had never read anything by James Joyce. In fact, the only piece of classical Irish literature that I could remember reading is Oscar Wilde's A Portrait of Dorian Gray. I can't tell you when I read it, and honestly, I really couldn't tell you that much about it. It's been that long ago. But standing in front of the original first printed edition of Ulysses and then in front of the case that displayed Joyce's writing notes, I felt a desire to know more about the literature of the Irish. Over the course of the month-long research project, that desire grew. I'm not yet able to put into words exactly what this feeling is or where it comes from. If I had to guess, I would assume it comes from various places. I have reason to believe that the majority of my ancestry comes from that part of the world. While my Hawaiian self has always been loved and honored, the rest of my heritage has been lumped into this generic whiteness, a nondescript, unidentified throw off of maybe Celtic, maybe Anglo-Saxon, maybe Scottish, maybe Irish. It now appears that Ulster is the most likely, but whatever it turns out to be, my experience this past month taught me that there is no generic when it comes to the history of a people, a community, a person. In this learning, I have encountered assumptions and shattered ideas and stereotypes while understanding the root from which some of that has originated. More formidable, I discovered a love of the people of Wexford, Ireland. I am blessed that whatever attracted me to them, they saw in me as well. There was no long path to friendship. We just kind of clicked. I am not a history major. I will not pursue historical studies per se in my graduate work. I am a literature major. I've decided that calling it English is problematic, and I'll refrain from it from now on, except for in those cases where it's needed for technical clarity. My time for graduate work will be on me before I know it, and I need to pursue something. My ideas for thesis and graduate work have changed a number of times over the last year or so in school. In each case, it was not the topic that I considered that gave me pause, but rather the constraint of the work that would logically follow. I'm fortunate that my studies can mostly be self-directed, as there's no CV per se that I'm trying to curate. I am in that privileged position of allowing my excitement, passions, and interests to lead the way in my academic pursuits. Unfortunately, each of my thoughts has floundered on the limited, whether it be in scope, topic, or theory. While this is to be somewhat expected when focus is decided upon for a focus you must have, I knew if I kept my mind open, a better way would present itself. I believe I found my answer in the Irish literature focus. With this pivot, the opportunities open for a variety of conversations versus closing them. Instead of focusing on a time period, a social implication, or a theory, I can focus on a geography and a community. I think I have found the path to creating the freedom to explore different avenues while canvassing the Irish literature offerings. It occurred to me that one could pick a worse starting point than Ulysses. In preparing to tackle this mammoth work that is considered one of the great literary classics, I learned that the secondary protagonist, Stephen Dedalus, is the primary protagonist in A Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man. If you have followed any of my series writings before, you know I had to back up and change my starting point. Interestingly, I found an abridged reading by Colin Farrell. They call it a performance, and we'll get into that at a later time. It was an experience to listen to the words while I read them. For now, I'll tell you that the juxtaposition has created a need for a complete rewrite of my thesis proposal that I had just submitted last semester. While I'm a bit anxious about that, I have firmly decided that it is better to rework now than to spend the next year working on something else and wishing I wasn't. I've found the stream of consciousness style used by Joyce to be a bit difficult to follow in the beginning. After a while, it did get easier. Still, on the whole, I began to get a little frustrated with myself, if not the work. I'm not accustomed to fiction being difficult to follow or to understand. However, more often than not, I could not escape the feeling that Joyce had just done something beautiful and smart, and I was missing it. I know that missing it isn't quite the right description. The truth is, I am still a foreigner in a foreign land. There's much of their language, culture, and history and community that I don't understand and I'm not familiar with. Perhaps it's that assumption of generic whiteness that kept me from considering the work I would need to do to understand the nuances of the art. Perhaps it was timely that I learned that my American perspective cannot be transplanted on every Eurocentric culture as cross-compatible simply because I think it should be. So, I'm going to focus on A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man until it gives me what I'm looking for and I can move on. Or until it creates the foundation for future studies on its own merit. I'm not sure which it'll accomplish, but I can assure you I will not be disappointed either way. In the meantime, I will not halt the exposure to the voices. I will begin to tackle Ulysses. I have introduced myself to the work of Charles J. Kickham, John Boyne, and Sebastian Barry. When I look at it like this, I realize how little work I've done in the grand vision of things. But then I remind myself this is only my first day home. To close the loops, I'm not going to get into any of the literary commentary surrounding A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man right now. Maybe that's because I think I've covered enough actual ground for today. Most probably because I've realized I don't really have any yet. But here at Bitches and Bourbon and Books with Bitches and Bourbon, we just wanted to kind of give you a little peek into some of the new material in addition to all of your beloved whiskey content that is going to be here in those conversations. As always, we look forward to your suggestions for commentary and conversations, and we hope to talk to you guys soon. Cheers.